Hey, Stephen Hatchett, the Ambassador Chair for the Chicago Urban League's MetroBoard chapter. We are having our 7th speaker series focused on mental health. We have some interesting and some powerful folks in the room that will be discussing the capacity issues around mental health, what exactly is mental illness, and a host of other things. Stay tuned. It's going to be an exciting conversation. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How many of you guys, this is your first time being in the Urban League? Being at the Urban League? Raise your hand. I was having an interesting conversation about whether or not a lot of folks heard about the Urban League before the age of 21. And apparently, if you grew up on the West Side, the Urban League was nowhere in your vocabulary. But other times, it's just your family members have talked about it, you've heard about sort of this legacy. And I think if this is your first introduction, I think this is a good conversation to be a part of. For those that don't know, my name is Stephen Hatchett. I am the Ambassadorship Chair for the Metropolitan Board of the Chicago Urban League. That is a young professional auxiliary for the Urban League. We've been around for over 35 years. We were given a grant by Centene, Wave Centene Representative Justin Coleman. And in having that grant, it really just allowed us to also afford us the opportunity to have this conversation on mental health. And for those that don't know as well, the speaker series is a part of the Metropolitan Board's program and has been for the last 2 years. We've had conversations from an industry perspective around journalism, technology, criminal justice, what does it take to sort of go into politics, things around what it takes to sort of, think about criminal justice reform and how do we get access to that from an advocacy perspective. And now we're having this discussion on mental health. And I think the reason why a lot of you guys are here to sort of learn more about not only sort of the stigma associated with mental health, but what are some issues around the capacity issues we have and other things like that. And I also want to acknowledge the partner, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Mental Illness. And our director is here, Jennifer McCown. Give it up for her again. I have the esteemed privilege to introduce her, and she will be our moderator for tonight. Jennifer McCown is the Associate Director of NAMI Chicago, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. She works primarily on NAMI Chicago's policy and advocacy agenda to improving the mental health system in Illinois, including focusing on prevention and early intervention, strengthening mental health services, enhancing support services, and supporting comprehensive crisis response system. Jen is the co-chair of the statewide mental health opportunities for youth diversion task force. Jen previously worked as a coordinator for health planning at the Mid-American Center for Public Health, practice housed at the University of Illinois at Chicago School of Public Health. In this role, she worked on the Illinois State Health Assessment and Improvement Plan for 2016. Again, give it up again for Jennifer McCown.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
This is on,
Yeah.
but I probably have to speak close to it. Don't like this. Not a good sign if the moderator can't work the microphone, right?
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. 2 hands. Well, thank you so much for having us tonight. Me, Jen McGowan, and our panel will introduce in just a moment and let them share a little bit about their own backgrounds before we start asking some questions and chatting about mental health and trauma in the community. I just wanted to thank the Metropolitan Board again for partnering with us at NAMI and really doing the lion's share of hosting this speaker series tonight. We're so happy to participate with organizations like the Chicago Urban League to talk about mental health in the community and talk about ways that we can strengthen our mental health system. So I want to start briefly. The plan for tonight is that we'll talk here. Everyone will share a little bit about their work. We'll do some questions around mental health and what signs and symptoms look like, what treatment looks like, how we support people in our communities experiencing mental health disorders, and how do we reflect on community trauma and community resiliency. So those are sort of the broad themes that we'll be talking about tonight, and then we'll have the opportunity for some question and answers. So please, feel free to make a mental note of what you'd like to ask our wonderful panelists tonight. So I wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction about NAMI. So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I am from the Chicago affiliate. And we work with individuals and community partners to provide education and training and support for individuals living with mental health conditions and their loved ones. So we do that in a few ways. We provide training on signs and symptoms, on de-escalation techniques, on just understanding what the mental health system in the state and in the city. But we also provide a variety of education programming. And Erica Bailey, Reverend Bailey, will talk a little bit, or can talk a little bit if she wants to, about her volunteering with NAMI Chicago, but that includes sharing her own experience through a couple of our different education programs. So we work with the Chicago Public Schools on a program called Ending the Silence, where we talk about mental health awareness and how to support young adults and how they can support their family members who might be experiencing mental health conditions. We reached over 5,000 CPS students in the last school year. And that program, the Ending the Silence program, is the only mental health curriculum that is available in CPS. So it's a really important component of talking to students. We also train the Chicago Police Department on a training called Crisis Intervention Team. The CIT trained officers have more extensive training on de-escalation related to mental health emergencies. I'm happy to chat more about the structure of that training and that program and how some research done in Chicago has shown it to be effective versus non-CIT trained officers in mental health emergencies. But a component of that training includes speakers and volunteers with NAMI Chicago telling their story, so officers gain some perspective of what a mental health emergency might look like, and the best way to interact with individuals in a mental health crisis. Some of our other programs are individual focused. So we have a program called Honest, Open, Proud. It's a workshop where folks who are living with mental health conditions can talk about disclosure in whatever setting that they're interested in. So if they're considering telling a neighbor or telling a family member or telling an employer that they're living with a mental health condition, we sort of work through some of the components of doing that. And then lastly, some of our other programming is support programming. So we have family support groups and peer support groups that we offer on the northwest and south sides. So that's sort of a big picture of our programming. But what I really want to start with today is just a little bit of a context of mental health. So 1 in 5 individuals will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. And I think we all can sort of relate to this understanding of times where we feel the blues or we feel stress at work or at home. And so we have an inherent understanding of what it means to be sort of up and down in our own mental health and our own mental wellness. But that 1 in 5 individuals will experience a mental health condition, and 1 in 17 will experience a serious mental health condition in their lifetime. So that's really a lot of people, and it's a lot of people that we interact with and that we know and that we love. And treatment for mental health conditions is very effective. It's often, or in comparison to some physical illnesses, although mental health conditions are conditions of our brain, but it can be more, treatment for mental health conditions can be more effective even than some other physical health treatments. And we also know that recovery is possible because we work with and live with and are friends with people who are living in recovery all of the time. And recovery is more than just prescription medications, although it might be an important component of someone's recovery. It's also the support services, it's the family, it's the community, it's the faith-based community, and it's housing. It's an important part of the recovery model to ensure that individuals have a safe environment to both be in and also to be able to stay in line with whatever their medical treatment components are. So we know that treatment is effective, we know that recovery is possible, but 50% of individuals with a mental health condition, adults, are not receiving treatment. And that's really because it's because of a lot of different factors, one of which, in which I think we'll focus a lot on tonight, is stigma. But the others are cost, access, transportation, all of the pieces that we're really fighting for in our mental health system right now. We live in a state that hasn't had a budget in 2 years, going on 3 years. That has had an effect on our mental health services. We also live in a country where we're considering kicking 23 million people off of health insurance over the next 8 years, which is really a lot of people who are experiencing mental health conditions and that utilize or that rely on their health coverage to to live in recovery, right? So it's a very challenging time. It's going to require and continues to require a lot of advocacy among all of us to say that we really need to care about our mental health, and we need those services that we know are best practices and we know are effective to continue providing those in the community. But we also live in a world where people, where it's challenging to talk about our mental health conditions because it's really not what we do often in our families, in our communities, in our own environments. So we're here today, a lot of our panelists do this work too, but to shine a light on mental health and also and trauma as an aspect of affecting our mental health, and start talking about what we can do and how we can support each other. So that's my 2 cents on our big concept, and we'll answer questions when it gets to that time. But I'm going to turn this over to Reverend Erica Bailey, Dr. Sonia Denuzulu, did I say it? Okay, and Christina Smith to just share just a little bit about who they are and the work that they do, and then we'll get into the questions.
Good evening, everyone. I probably won't even need a mic because I have a pretty big mouth per my husband. But as she said, I am Reverend Erica Bailey. My husband pastors a church on this west side of Chicago. And there's a lot that I can tell you today. I live with major depression. I have been ordained in the NAMI Church since 2009. And there's a lot of things that, in the African American community primarily, that we do and don't talk about. One of those things that we don't talk about is mental illness. And I have lived with major depression and anxiety for 20 plus years. But I kept that secret to myself because we don't always talk about these things. And because of stigma and because of shame. And so I just held it to myself. One of the things that really helped me to kind of come to grasp with who I am and what I'm really dealing with outside of the church hats, outside of the too blessed to be stressed things that we say every week. Oh, praise the Lord, how you doing? I'm blessed, highly favored. All the things that we say, all the attitudes that we say each and every week was, back in 2013, a friend of ours committed suicide. And it was a friend that attended church every single week. But apparently he was dealing with mental health issues. And he was suffering. And he was miserable on the inside. And while church members were so busy running around saying, we're too blessed to be stressed. Everything's okay. Praise the Lord, everybody. Blessed, highly favored. When the praises go up,
blessings come down.
Thank you. Y'all can finish those things out. And I knew at that time that I had to do something. And the reason why I knew that is because I knew that I had been suffering and dealing with my own mental health issues for a very long time. And so I turned to my husband and I said, I really felt that God is moving me to remove the masks. You know how it is in church service. When a first lady and the pastor walk in, they usher you all the way up to the front. They want to put their corsage on you. You're just putting these positions of being highly favored. I wanted more for myself, and I wanted more for the congregation. So back in October of 2016, I'll back it up just a little bit. I got acquainted with NAMI, and I'll be very candid with you. I went in the back door of NAMI by going into a class called Family to Family. And I went to NAMI and I said, I want to learn how to help people who are living with mental health issues, because I know a lot of people who have mental health issues. Again, not willing to say that that person was me. So I enrolled in a 16-week class. Now, who does that? Committed to going to a 16-week class. And about a fourth of the way through, I found the courage to tell the instructor and the peers in that class that that person was me. And so at that time, I began to then peel off those masks layer by layer by layer, and to recognize the fact that I am living with major depression. Now, for all of you biblical scholars out there, like the Apostle Paul, who dealt with a thorn in his flesh, I have asked God 3 times to take this affliction from me. 3+ times. 3 times 3. 30 times 3 to take the affliction from me. So please don't come up after me after saying, just ask God to take it away from you. I've been there. These earrings will come off, but we might not. But I have asked God to take this affliction from me. And he has said, my grace is sufficient for you. So what God has taught me to do is to live with this affliction. What's more, he has taught me how to live in recovery and to also go back and help other people who are living with mental health issues, and to say that we can live in recovery. What does recovery look like for me? And I'm so glad I don't have to talk about the medical stuff, because we have these geniuses here. But what it looks like for me to live in recovery, I have to take an active part in my recovery every single day. What does that look like? I exercise every day, and it's not just to look good. It's because we know that the exercise releases endorphins in my brain, and I'm willing to do anything that's legal that makes me feel good. And so when I exercise, it makes me feel better. It gives me the energy to go about my day to become a productive member of society. I eat right every day, because I know when I eat right, whatever I eat affects my brain. The biochemistry of my brain is affected. So I watch what I eat. 80% of the time, I'm eating pretty good. 20% of the time, I like Garrett's popcorn just like you like Garrett's popcorn. Make sense? So I found a compromise that I can live with. Medication, for me, works. Now, I know there's a stigma with medication, but I'll say this, and I am going to pass the mic. I have asthma. Asthma is a disease that affects my lungs. My major depression and anxiety is a disease that affects my brain. Why would I'm not afraid to, if I start breathing heavy, I'm getting that purse right down there, and I'm getting out my inhaler, and I will take that inhaler because it clears up my lungs. For me, if my mind is off kilter a little bit, I simply go back to the doctor and say, hey, listen, things aren't right. Can we adjust my medication? It's simply a medical illness that can be addressed, and I can live in recovery. I work much better when I'm on medication. My husband's happier. My kids are happier. My dog is happier. I'm not picking him. Make sense? So I exercise, medication, sleep is imperative for me. If I don't get the adequate amount of sleep, I'm thrown off for the next day. And my spirituality, my faith is very important to me. All of these things, I go around in public schools and I talk about the trauma that has led up to the onset of my mental health issues. It's different for everybody. What we do know is that environmental factors can lead to the onset of mental illness, as well as genetic factors. For me, there's mental illness on my mom's side of the family and on my dad's side of the family. There's also some things that happen in my environment that I believe triggered or contributed to the onset of my mental health issues. Just had me all kind of messed up. Thank God I was able to get into therapy. Thank God I was able to build the support systems. Thank God I was able to find NAMI, who gave me the courage to get the help that I needed to live a productive life. If you know anybody, recovery is possible. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I will go everywhere I can, over the hills and everywhere, to let people know that mental health issues, it doesn't have to come with that stigma. I've never been in a straitjacket. Now, if I had to, I will. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it, but it's possible. Recovery is possible. It's not something that has to be stigmatized. We can live a healthy and productive lifestyle, and that's my story. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Erica. The power of the narrative is incredibly important, and I thank you for sharing your story, because part of having a narrative is part of, having your narrative is part of the process of recovering and restoring or repairing anything related to mental illnesses. So I'm Sonia Denny Zulu. I mean, my story won't be as much of a narrative. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at the University of Chicago. I'm in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences. That's added on simply because we want people to understand that a mental illness does have genetic and biological roots to it. So it may not explain everything, but it is a good component of it. So I work primarily with children and adolescents and emerging adults. It's usually up to age 25. Adolescence doesn't stop at 18, just so you know. But we call it emerging adulthood, same thing. But anyways, and I work with kids with anxiety, depression, families and emerging adults with a whole host of different, mental illness concerns. But my specialization is working with youth exposed to trauma and violence. So I'm the only one in my department. I'm building a team, thankfully, but I'm the only one in my department that has, expertise, I would like to say expertise, in doing trauma treatment. So I work with kids, wide range of variety of trauma experiences, from interpersonal violence, such as domestic violence, community violence, all the way through like medical trauma, like had one kid had 52 surgeries because he was attacked by pit bulls on his face. So that, and I work with kids who have car accidents, house burns, and things of that nature that may not necessarily be interpersonal violence. So trauma is a wide range of things. And in terms of, I'm a clinician, I'm a researcher as well as I'm faculty. So as faculty, we got to do it all. They want us to be superstars. But as faculty, my research interest is also, trying to promote mental health in out-of-school time settings for youth exposed to, chronic stressors. So one of them right now that I'm really focused on is looking at community violence with African American youth. So I am very passionate about this because a lot of the providers, like youth providers that I work with, have these kids in their spaces and they do not know what to do when they're triggered or if they're having behavioral concerns, because sometimes trauma is not often the first thing they think about. They think about this kid is just being bad and reacting this way, and I work with providers to think differently about it in schools as well. But the thing that I like most is that how can we train up a workforce that's working with these kids, create models that can actually promote health, mental health in these settings, so I can work myself out of a business of, treating people with mental illnesses. I don't see that happening for a long time, but at least I want to start thinking more about prevention. So that's more the work that I do. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to, having a good conversation with you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening again. Chris Smith. This evening I'm representing Become Inc., which is a community development organization engaged in participatory practices in a wide variety and range of activities. So some of it's evaluative work, some of it is community development building work, some of it is school-based work. We were in Milwaukee this morning doing some of the work around, interestingly enough, child psychiatry, right, access in the state of Wisconsin. And so that's a part of my work, and I'm representing Become tonight. Other parts of my world, I run a behavioral health division for a community health center within the city of Chicago currently, and my history has been, and so licensed clinical social workers, some psychiatry, some clinical psychologists are staff members, but a history working in EAP managed care, a history of working with city to state, did quite a bit of extensive work around this whole thing, around specific kind of interest around specific populations. Really started an institution here in the city of Chicago, like some of you may know, Community Services, which serves black LGBT individuals on the south side of Chicago. And then, but started my career a very long time ago in casework, right, for DCFS. So always exposed to kids, families exposed to trauma, and then moved through there to do kind of like institutional work around kids and families exposed to trauma and what kind of irradiating effects of that actually look like. And then have moved through my career and in some way have always been either connected to or responsible for behavioral health, mental health services for people, primarily people of color, primarily people who have been disaffected with regard to income and resources. And so that's kind of been the trajectory of my career. And have an interest, right, around this issue of trauma, around this issue of access, around the issue of reducing stigma. I so appreciate your narrative, Dr. Bailey. Thank you, because it is a huge piece of what we see and always are managing when people come to our doors, essentially, right? And so and we would talk about structural forces as well, right? But individuals come to the door and they're in pain, right? So we can talk about the big pictures after they get through the door and kind of get able to take some of those things off of themselves. But we start there, right? But there are some things that really do affect people of color, right? And sometimes you can unbundle them and sometimes you cannot, right? And so we spend time thinking about how we create models for distilling what they can control, what our system and structural controls, and figuring out then how we advocate and serve in the best capacity to support people's wellness in many ways. So I can talk more about that. Thank you.
Great, so we have a great panel and we can answer a lot of your questions, but I'll start with sort of, let's go to the baseline and talk a little bit about what we mean when we say mental health or when we say trauma. So either from our own experience, what are those symptoms like, or what are we really talking about, so folks can start thinking about what they've reflected on or their own experiences. Open to anyone.
It depends on how deep y'all want to get, because I come from a very personal standpoint, and especially in terms of ending the silence. I deliberately go into school with the purpose of ending the silence, and the reason why I do is because when I was going through my very traumatic experiences as a young person, I thought it was just me. And so when I go into the school and present to the young people, many of who look just like me, look just like us, I want them to know that they are not alone. And so in terms of my traumatic experiences, I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse when I was growing up. And so when I'm talking about environmental factors, and these are, when I go in to do Ending the Silence, these are young people who are in high school. And so they're not babies, so that they're not falling out of the chair, things like that. And the school does a pretty good job of preparing the students before we come in to let them know that what some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. But what it looked like was a child who was out of control behavioral-wise. It looked like I was a behavior disorder child. Mm-hmm. I was cussing out teachers. I mean, you might not be able to tell by this little angelic face, but anyway, I was cussing out teachers. I was fighting all the time. I was underachieving with my schoolwork. And what was happening is that I was so torn up on the inside. I was so depressed. I was so guilt-ridden. I was so powerless that I was just doing things. I was acting out the turmoil that was going on the inside. It's because I didn't have the words to articulate what was happening at home. And unfortunately, people missed the signs. So what they saw was, she's behavior disorder. This child's got some issues. Well, I had issues, but you really didn't know what the issues were because people didn't take the time to really look beneath the surface. And so I had that going on. There was some domestic violence issues going on, and to be honest, I survived my suicide attempt at the age of 11 years old. So that gives you an idea of some of the turmoil that was going on and some of the trauma that was going on in my home.
But anyway, so mental illness suggests that it's a disorder, right? So when I think of mental health, I think of trauma can impede health, right? So trauma is usually an event that happens to a person, or either they can witness it, or they can experience it firsthand as a victim, or you could be a first responder. Those will get into the criteria of the DSM-5 for PTSD in terms of identifying what is a traumatic stressor. But in any case, that's something that kind of disrupts the functioning of your life. And so if that were to happen, there's a whole host of symptoms that come along with it, and elegantly talked about your experience. And again, I really appreciate you being so open and so sharing of your history to empower others and to help others to talk more about that. And so you gave a really great examples about how you presented with behavior issues, right? And so oftentimes, that's not really good mental health. There's something that's, underlining that. So nobody did ask, like, was it trauma, or do you really have ADHD? They often look very much similar, the symptoms, so we have to tease that apart. But anyways, I think of, there's a difference, and trauma is more of a mental illness. If you, again, even if you don't meet full criteria for PTSD, for example, but there are other diagnostic categories that I use, meaning that you don't meet full criteria because the treatment will still be the same. And so for those kids most of the kids I see don't meet criteria for PTSD, but they still have enough traumatic stress that it could lead to anxiety or depression or other mental illnesses. And it sounds like for you, major depression was one of the things that you experienced. And so thank you for sharing that, because I like to use real examples so people can really get understanding. I hope that's okay.
Oh, perfectly. Sure.
But so I hope that answers the question a little bit about mental health and illness. But health to me is like physical health. People don't say I have physical health problems. I have physical illness problems. So mental health, again, we have to think more about mental health. To me, it's different from mental illness, and so we have to, I think, separate the two.
It is definitely, it's a very important distinction. So, Dr. Bailey, you talked about what you know is your baseline currently now, right? And so you work through supportive therapy and pharmacology as well. Well, mental health really is about knowing what your baseline is also, right? So it's about knowing and understanding what the combination of your psychological, emotional, and social well-being looks like for you, essentially, right? And so that means you have to be able to tap into, do a little bit of introspection work. That means you have to be in therapy in order to know what that looks like. But you got to know what's too much for you. You have to know when this is out of the bounds of what feels like it's reasonable for me, or this level of stress is too high for me, or my level of inactivity is really too high, right? So you got to understand what that baseline is, because that's important for figuring out for assessing, right, when you begin to experience distress, right? So some of the challenges that I experienced, and we clinical staff experiences, that oftentimes people come in when they have over-accommodated and overstretched themselves and been asked to do far too much and way too much. And so they've lost really what should be the edges for them, right, in terms of being able to maintain their wellness, essentially. And so so it becomes difficult to figure out in that process what's reasonable to expect from them, what's not reasonable to expect anymore, what's reasonable for them in terms of kind of keeping some scaffolding around themselves as they move through their own kind of journey in their life, right? And then when to insert other kind of agents, essentially, right? So whether that's medication, whether that's supportive talk therapy, whether that's a group, whatever that looks like for you, understanding what that distinction is. So you're right, mental health is that, right? It's always figuring out. It's different from when you look like it maybe at 20 than it is at 50. It's different at 14 than it is at 65, essentially, right? Because you always, it's a dynamic life process. And then, of course, mental illness is just as we just talked about, right? It's when you move into a specific kind of diagnostic criteria, and based on kind of this constellation of symptoms, duration, and all those things, clinician, the DSM-5, and a number of other things help us figure out what might be the best, you being the best self-reporter, quite frankly, right, of what that actually might look like and what that actually might be. And then from there, figuring out what we do in terms of intervention, in terms of kind of a treatment plan for you. But mental health is about how you get through your day, how you get through your life, how you manage stressors. Trauma is exactly what you said. It's an event, right? And not everybody who experiences the trauma will be diagnosed with PTSD, right? So there are a number of reasons why you wouldn't be, and we can talk through some of those things. Some of it has to do with resiliency factors, some of it has to do with, your proximity to the event, some of it has to do with, your capacity to manage. A big piece of people in managing through any kind of event is feeling like you have some sense of control, right? Feeling like that you can manage and you have the capacity to recover in ways that work best for you in your life from that particular event. And when people lose that, right, is when they begin to lose the grip and the slip, right, around how to manage the event, the witnessing, experiencing, the re-entrapment, the re-engage. I mean, there are a number of ways we can talk about that on that continuum, but those are two separate ends of the continuum, essentially, right? And even within trauma, it still is a kind of a continuum around that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And just to build on that point a little bit, it's a lot of sometimes what we talk about at NAMI when we're talking to parents is, you know, we can talk a lot about symptoms that might look like typical childhood behavior, losing sleep, changing sleep patterns, changing friends, drops in grades. Sometimes that can scare parents when we talk about those things to watch out for. But we always, you know, want to come back to this idea of the baseline. So it's not only knowing, you know, knowing yourself, but it's knowing your loved ones and knowing their baseline, and then looking for deviations from that baseline as, you know, as you know, potential areas of concern, but having an understanding of where they are too is really important. And as we're kind of midway through this conversation, I just wanted to go back for one moment and say we obviously are talking about some topics here that are heavy, and folks in the room might have their own experiences with a variety of the things that we've mentioned here tonight. So just wanted to offer the opportunity. You can always, you know, please feel free to take a break if you need to, and please know that after this conversation today, I will be around. I'm happy to talk to anyone who just wants to chat a little bit more. So please know that that is available to you, and we are all, you know, conscious of the topic, but want to be responsive to, you know, your own experiences. So I want to talk for a second a little more specifically about treatment and recovery, and then sort of talk a little bit more about the community impact. But can we give some examples of both trauma treatment and treatment for mental health conditions that, you know, that folks might not be as aware of as prescription medications? How has that worked for you in your practices or you in your own life?
I'll let you start this time.
So, yeah, so, you know, prescription medications for one. So that is, as you can probably imagine, is a very difficult, often a very difficult subject for people to think about, right, in terms of kind of their own recovery. And so, you know, one of the things that, and I have never, and we don't as part of our practice, obviously recommend pharmacology as a first line in discussion ever, right? It is always a discussion about what it's meant for you and historically with your family, right? Figuring out just kind of your family history. We want to, part of why we do that is also to figure out if within that history are there medications and so forth that have people in your family have been allergic to? Are there medications that have responded, people in your family have responded well to? If folks are willing to kind of talk about, you know, kind of their historical, their histories. But then we do create that as a part of the conversation. So it just, with anything else, it's a treatment planning process essentially. So it's always about self-report. It's always about as much data as we can collect. If we can collect from other family members, we try to do that because that's supported. Particularly, if it depends on how well the person is able to kind of accurately account their history, right? So if they can give, sometimes if people come in and they're in an acute phase, right, they might not be the best reporters of what's going on with them. And so we try to look at either spouses or partners or adult children or work with adults to figure out if these stories, if these facts are actually, if they're real, right? Getting a sense of that. And then we move through a process of, you know, the diagnostic process. And so making some differential diagnosis, right? So is this depression? Is this really, you know, looking at more severity? Is it, you know, bipolar disorder? Is it 1? Is it 2? Figuring out if it's, you know, what this means based on the self-report, right? All that we can do is make the best assessment based on what is in front of us, essentially. So we look at the diagnoses, right? We get a sense of what it is. We talk through that actually with people because it's really important for folks to understand what that is, not to diagnose and provide, or to diagnose patients without having real clear conversations of what that means. And part of the reason we do that also is because it goes in their medical records. We provide treatment and care in a primary care setting. And so when they pull up their patient visit, their summary, the diagnosis that we assign is going to be present there as well, right? So we don't want people to be surprised about it. So we spend time walking through, we talk through their symptoms, we talk through, you know, the risk factors, we talk through the history, right, in terms of the presenting factors and presenting symptoms. And then we talk through what they feel like is a reasonable treatment plan, right? So in most cases, it's going to be cognitive behavioral therapy that we use, right, which is kind of this triad of work that we do around the cognitions and their effect on emotions and those emotions' effect on behaviors, right? And we do that through a variety of mechanisms, right, in terms of how we kind of assess and deal with specific topics. And so the other thing that Dr. Bailey talked about, which is important, is behavior activation, right? That is a huge part of the work also. Oftentimes patients will feel like that they want to feel better before they do more. And we remind them that the doing more helps you feel better. Essentially, so you can't wait until you feel better to do more, essentially. So you have to, I'm just saying, so it becomes this vicious cycle, right, around that. And then we broach the discussion around all of those things around pharmacology and what that means and looks like for you. And so that gets into a different place, right, because that gets into all your spiritual beliefs, it gets into this sense of loss of control, it gets into this sense of, right, so that, what does it mean to me not to be able to kind of manage my own cognitions and my own emotions without the supports of pharmacology. So we talk folks through that. When we do that, we typically have a psychiatrist that we work with that provides really consultation around that, language, education, psycho-ed around it as well. And then there's always the management of that. So even when they decide, yes, I'm going to take 20 milligrams of Zyprexa, right? Then it's an antidepressant. Then it's, what does that look like for me? What does that feel like? I feel differently now. I don't feel like I can function the same way I used to. So we look at adjustments and figuring out ways to do that. And so all of that gets wrapped into whatever we feel like is a reasonable supportive therapy process, whether that's weekly, whether that's bi-weekly. Sometimes it's twice a week based on the level of acuity that they come in with in terms of their presenting conditions. And so that's a part of kind of what we do. Of course, crisis work is a part of that in many cases, right? So when you work in community health, it's like working in, somebody indicated, a small county hospital. And so people show up in acute phases, right? We were at work the other day and started our day, and they called and said a patient dropped dead right in front of them. So we ran and had to go and do debrief with staff around just what it means to respond. So we're always figuring out, right, with individuals and with systems and processes, how to have the most impact, right, in the least restrictive way, and have them drive that treatment process as one way. But there are other methods as well, mindfulness practices, and a number of other things that we do also as part of that work, as an example.
I can speak more about child and adolescent. Would that be helpful to the
Hey,
audience?
Yes.
before you answer that, it seems like when it's a child, something happens when you're in your child years, that will last forever. But if that same thing happens when you're an adult, you can kind of get over that faster. Is there truth to that?
Well, you want to say?
Yeah, it depends.
Yes,
it depends
exactly.
on the type of trauma,
Exactly.
who did it, the severity of it, and the frequency of something that might have happened.
Exactly.
It also depends on the adult might have